Hello, you're watching the Full Scottish on Broadcasting Scotland. I'm Cameron Archibald. Today I'm joined by Richard Arkless, who's a lawyer and former MP, Calum Kerr, who's also former MP and also works in the telecoms industry. I'm joined by Amanda Burgauer, who is a chair of Scottish Rural Action, and Maggie Gordon, who is a Scottish Rural Action volunteer. Today we'll be discussing different topics such as the recent event that took place in Dumfries with all under one banner. We're discussing Arlene Foster, who's coming to Fife at the end of this month with the Orange Order. We're discussing the Growth Commission and what everyone thinks about their proposals. And finally, pennies and what's going on there with the seafood processing work group. So, without further ado, let's go on with the show. Before we get on with the show, Broadcasting Scotland was at the All Under One Banner event, which had attracted 10,000 marchers according to local police numbers. So let's see what we found out when we were there recording.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
In your opinion, when do you reckon the next referendum is best to come around?
I'll leave it to the judgment of Nicola Sturgeon and her group to make the decision. We are here to influence that decision, but it's up to them to make the decision for us.
And final question, what is your main reason for supporting independence?
Well, we love Scotland. We think it's a fabulous country. It's a very happy, free country with lovely people, and it's got so much to offer. It's a tiny country in the world. We're very fair. We believe in equality, freedom, and freedom of speech, and we are social human beings. Scotland's a lovely country to live in.
I just believe that as a country we have the right to self-determination. Look around here today. This is Dumfries. I believe in this town, but Scotland's it looks a well-off country, and I know there's poor here, but every country has it. But this country here definitely could stand on its own 2 feet. I don't know you. You'll be a bright laddie. I think I'm a bright person. We have the brains, we have the wherewithal, and I think we could manage it, and why shouldn't we?
Well, I do hope I am bright, and I'm sure you are bright yourself. But thank you both for your time. Thanks very much.
No bother.
Thank you. What has brought you to the march today?
Well, we wanted to show the local Conservatives and the local Unionists that there is still a great appetite for independence here. I personally am fed up with Brexit. I think it's been done in a shocking manner, and I'm fed up with the way Scotland's been disrespected by Westminster. They're absolutely not taking account of our views. We're absolutely not being a leader in the UK.
Now, you're part of the group English Scots for Yes. Do you want to tell us a bit more about this organisation?
Well, thank you, yes. I'm part of the wider Scottish-wide English Scots for Yes. We've just started one in Dumfries and Galloway. What we are is people who originated either recently or a long time ago from south of the border, who totally support Scotland and believe in Scottish independence, and are appalled at the way Westminster is treating Scotland. Some of us don't sound Scottish. I've been here since I was 3 years old. Some of us sound very, very English, but they're all behind. We've got Americans for Yes, and we've got Italians for Yes as part of our group as well.
How long have you been around for then, roughly?
Well, the English Scots for Yes has been around since the last independence referendum. Dumfries and Galloway branch has only started up a few weeks ago, and what we're hoping to do is go round to the wider region, do street stalls, because there's a lot of people from south of the border, and what we're trying to say to them is, if you don't stand up for Scotland, the powers of Holyrood, you will not have a great health service, you'll not have Scotland the brand, you'll not have help with the council tax, you'll not have help with your prescriptions. So it's still a very important message for these people.
And finally, for the last question, what is your personal opinion or your personal reason for supporting independence?
Because I think any country should be run by the people that know it, by as local as possible, by people in Holyrood, and not people who do not understand Scotland, do want to waste the resources on illegal foreign wars and Trident, and really don't have a lot of respect for Scotland. It's totally natural for a country to rule itself.
John from English Scots for Yes, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So what are your main reasons for coming to the march today?
Jeanette?
Well, I came because, as Valerie said earlier, we were in Glasgow, we did the Glasgow march, met a lot of people from different parts of Scotland. So AUOB have organised marches all over Scotland. So I'm hoping to go to them all, because these people are coming to us, coming to Glasgow all the time. So it'd be good to see a good following in the other areas of Scotland.
Yeah, I enjoyed the march in Glasgow very much. That's the biggest march I've been on in Glasgow since the march against the war in Iraq back. Yeah, so it was massive, and I wanted to come down here to Dumfries and show my support in this sort of more Tory area. I was quite keen to do that, and I can't go to Inverness, but I'm intending to go to Dundee as well. So.
In your personal opinion, when do you think there should be another referendum?
I think that I would like to hear Nicola say something at conference about when she would like to have it. I understand that we're waiting to find out what happens with the Brexit negotiations. I hope no later than autumn next year.
I think it is a very difficult decision, and I think people, when they see the shambles of the government and all the scandalous behaviour, people are very impatient for a referendum and for independence, as am I. But I think it is extremely important that we don't have it at the wrong time. So as Jeanette says, I think it is very important to link it to what happens with the Brexit negotiations, which are shambolic and quite fluid at the moment. And I do have without sounding too much like a sheep, I do have confidence in Nicola Sturgeon, huge confidence in her ability as a stateswoman to choose the right time, but I would like to see it.
I don't think
Not
she's led us wrong
yet.
yet.
No. Possibly the end of 2019, maybe 2020.
So you wish it to be earlier, but you reckon it'll be later on from that date?
Possibly, but I think people who have an appetite for independence are already campaigning for yes at the moment. Yeah. I certainly have been, I'm very active, not just in marches, but in different, you know, within the SNP, and also like I'm out campaigning as often as I can, so yes.
You with Women for Independence as well?
Not anymore, no.
Okay.
And final question, what is your main reason for supporting Scottish independence?
My main reason for supporting independence is I'm 63, I'm a WASPie as well. My main reason for supporting independence is I want to see a better life for my grandchildren. I may not live long enough to see it get any better, but I want a better life for them.
When I lived through the Thatcher years, and in that time we saw Scotland reject Tory politics hugely, but we were kept under the boot of Thatcher because we were linked to England. And at the time I wasn't an SNP voter, but I have been for many years now, and more I've come round to realise that the only way that we're going to have a better country, as Jeanette says, is by independence. Small countries, small European countries, that's the way we want to go, like some of the Nordic countries. We're not like them, we're different, but we can have a better country, we can have a better future, and independence is the only way to do it.
Okay. Thank you both very much for your time, and have a lovely day.
So, let's kick off with the show. We'll start off with Richard. Now, we had estimates that there was 10,000 marchers there. That was confirmed by the local police station. That's fairly impressive for Dumfries, which is a very strong Conservative area as of recently.
Well, firstly, I think it's worth kicking that myth into touch. Pound for pound, my view, we've got the most hardened, committed and dedicated activists for independence that exist in Scotland. We have a huge army of volunteers, and Galloway up in this deal, before it was joined with Dumfries, was consistently electing SNP representatives. So I don't subscribe to the fact that it's strange for Dumfries. There's a Dumfries almost voted yes, and Stranraer, the second biggest town in this constituency, voted yes. There are thousands of independent supporters here, and there are hundreds of activists here. And I would say at least 50% of that crowd today were local people that came from local areas. So it's good to get that message across to Scotland that we're not anti-independence in the south, and we have a very strong base, and we're looking forward to getting that employed more in the future.
Maggie, maybe about a year or two ago, you'd find an event in Glasgow would attract 10,000. And as of recently, we've had events in Glasgow that attracted about 90,000, or arguably 90,000. Others would say would be 50,000, the police say about 35,000. But either way, that's tens of thousands of people now turning out to these events. And especially one in an rural area like Dumfries, that's very impressive. So what's your view on those matters and those numbers?
I really like the idea that it seemed very inclusive. There were groups that were made up from not quite your usual. But I think that there were some new groups there. I think Pensioners for Independence, unfurled their banner absolutely fresh. That's fantastic. These are a group that a couple of years ago would probably not want to be seen out there or their views heard. I think what probably happened in Glasgow was to say, guys, come on, let's hear your voices. And I think that there is I agree with Richard, I think that there is a swelling of opinion about we can do better if we take things into our own hands and become empowered. So I think it was a really joyful occasion, and I was delighted that I was just seeing people I hadn't seen before. I did know there were people supporting from other areas, but actually this is a very, very big region. So you get yes supporters from Stranraer, yes supporters from Annan, you're covering a fair whack anyway, let alone people coming from the Central Belt and beyond. So, and the borders.
Well, we'll just cut to you just now, Calum. What's your take on this then?
I thought it was fantastic. I have to hold my hands up and say that it's the first Independence March I've been on since 2014. I've not felt motivated or that it was appropriate to go to an Independence March until today. I understand why people have been doing them and that they want to kind of keep the fires burning for the appropriate time. But for me, I think we've got to get that balance right on the message we send out. But today was different. I feel we're in a change period with everything that's happening around Brexit and the EU. That today felt right. That I thought actually we are going to go. Of course, the fact is my wife's from Dumfries, right? And she was coming, whether I was coming or not. But it was brilliant to be down. And although this, the focus is on Dumfries, it is a South of Scotland march. There's people there today. Yes, Berwickshire, right? And by the way, it's a 3-day camel ride to get from Berwickshire across to Dumfries, as we all know, with the east-west connection. So it was brilliant. I loved it. And actually, I hope everybody that was there, and I'm sure they will have gone away going motivated, excited, energised, and wanting to go back and talk to their friends again and about the Growth Commission, about what's happening with Brexit, and start those conversations again around independence that obviously the Growth Commission and other things are encouraging.
Great. Just to say, by the way, don't slam the table because our mics are very sensitive.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm not telling you off.
Excited.
I know.
I think you were actually.
These are very topical, don't worry. But Amanda, let's go over to you. Now, you're the chair of Scottish Rural Action. The group's not entirely political, but it must feel pretty good though to have these numbers coming to the local area though.
Yeah, I mean, Scottish Rural Action is an apolitical group. We are very interested in political issues, but we're non-party political. So what was nice from our perspective as a participatory democracy, which is what the Scottish Rural Parliament really is about, it was lovely to see people who want to have an opinion and who are prepared to get out there and take some form of action. And whatever that is, and today we're talking about a rally for independence, but it's the fact that people are getting out there and standing up for what they believe in, and I think that's what Scottish Rural Action is all about.
One of the open questions which we asked when we were at the event was when do you personally believe there will be a referendum, and when, regardless of your opinion, you think there will be one. So open question to everyone. We'll start off with yourself, Richard. When do you think there will be a referendum, and in your opinion, when would you want a referendum?
Well, I think both are the same really, and for me it has to come before the end of this Scottish Parliament term. There is a democratic mandate for a referendum. The proposal that if Scotland was dragged out of the EU against the popular vote was placed in two parties' manifestos, and those two parties operate a majority in the Scottish Parliament. There is a democratic mandate to hold a referendum before this term. And if we cannot, as a movement, persuade people who pretty much occupy the majority of being disillusioned with Brexit Britain and how that particular union is going at the moment, if we can't win that argument in these circumstances, I don't think we'll ever win that argument. So my view is we have to use the mandate that we've got and use it before the end of the Scottish Parliament term. Get it done and we'll win it.
Maggie?
I think I'm with Richard on that, and I think as somebody who was reticent about describing why I believe Scotland should be independent, I think it's about watching the catastrophe that is happening. This was not what we voted for.
Yep.
And however you throw the cards on the table, I can't see any other way out of it. Now, for someone who is I don't know how to come forward very well politically, if you like. For me, I feel betrayed, and I'm thinking reflecting on the fact that somebody who is pretty mainstream, I feel betrayed because I was lied to, and my trust is lost. I agree that I think we have in that mandate, and it should be used before the bridges. The ropes are frayed and it's all gone. We have to go.
Calum?
Yeah, the challenge here, I think, is the level of incompetence by the UK government, because you can't see the process reaching a quick conclusion unless ultimately the Tory party falls apart and we drop off the Brexit cliff edge. I think it looks likely that the level of incompetence and disagreement within the Conservative Party will elongate the process, which will make it more challenging for us, because there is a desire, an understandable desire, to know what Brexit means, and that lack of clarity doesn't help, which is why it's not an easy question and that for me to answer. I agree absolutely with everything that's just been said, but the timing of it, I get why people want to go. I get why people want to move quickly. You know, I have some sympathy for the idea that we call it later this year for next year. But in the coming months, how much is it really going to move forward? Because the Conservatives seem incapable of doing it. This is the thing, by the way, and I know we're going to come to this later. This is the thing that really annoys me, that we come out with a 350 odd page document and we get pelters for it. They're in charge of Brexit. I mean, where's the document that explains what we're going to do there? It's crazy. But today is about, I think, getting that motivation and energy and excitement going, and we just need to channel that and work in the right way so that when it comes, we're ready.
Amanda, I know you can't give too much of you because you're representing a non-political group, or non-party political group, should I clarify there. So just to kind of broaden the question a bit more, does your group have a position on Brexit? Do they want to have more clarity on the situation? Or
I think I should say that, you know, our members of Scottish Rural Action belong to all parties and none. It's a very cross-party group. Our rural members are just like the rest of society. You know, they choose different parties to support. This year we have the Rural Parliament coming up in Stranraer in November, and I think that at that event we will be talking a lot about what happens to rural Scotland post-Brexit, because it is a major concern for a lot of people in the rural areas, landowners and those who just live and work in the area.
What sort of concerns do they have?
About our prosperity and about the forecast drop in the economy. The economy of rural Scotland is actually quite strong, and our food and drink exports, especially in this area, are extremely good. But of course Brexit could prove to be a massive threat for those, and I know that the people who attend the Rural Parliament in November will have quite a bit to say about it, and I'm looking forward to that discussion.
We're going to move on to the next topic, one a bit more controversial, we could say. Arlene Foster, who is leader of the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland, she has accepted an invitation to attend an Orange Order rally in Fife at the end of June. We're going to kick off with Richard again. How do you take this news, and what does it mean to you?
Well, I don't think it'd be a matter of great surprise that Arlene Foster attends Orange Order marches. She's the leader of the DUP, which is, in my view, ingrained with the Orange Order in Northern Ireland. So I don't think that in itself is slightly surprising, but I think you've got to think about what this says about the UK government. The UK government do not have the Conservative Party do not have a majority in the House of Commons, and they rely on Arlene Foster's party to keep them in government. Now, I don't think, with questions around Brexit, about the border, and very sensitive issues about Northern Ireland, and the UK government's traditional role as being a neutral arbiter in Northern Irish politics, if you contrast that with the leader of the party that's propping up the entire government going to Orange Order marches and associating herself with what is really termed as radical unionism, then I think that's very worrying, and I think that's something that people in Scotland should be taking careful note of and think to themselves, well, is that a government that represents me? Is that a government that we can trust? And are they compromised in a very important issue in Northern Ireland? And Northern Ireland's very, very close to Dumfries and Galloway. Stranraer's 20 miles from Belfast. And we have lots of friends and lots of colleagues and lots of people that communicate and travel both ways. And we care about Northern Ireland, and we don't like what we're seeing. We don't like the way that this party is propping up the entire UK government with these questionable beliefs on all sorts of issues and questionable contacts. And, you know, if she goes to Fife, good luck to her, but she certainly won't see me there, that's for sure.
You talked about radical unionism. Can you go into, and you talked about, you know, the aspects of it there, can you go into a bit more detail what radical unionism actually is?
I think to be honest, the concept of unionism itself is fairly radical. I can't think of another country in the world with our population that pulls its sovereignty the way that we do. That to me is a pretty radical constitution that we've got at the moment. I don't think it can get more radical. Normality is a nation of 5.5 million people making all of their own political decisions. That's normal. That's what every other country in the world has got. And I think as time goes on, I think the shift in opinion that you will see is ordinary people that perhaps don't live their day-to-day lives consumed by politics, looking at it and thinking, well, is this normal anymore? I mean, the Growth Commission, for all that it does, I think it makes one very, very important point, and it puts out there the small countries our size that do consistently better than us. Now, whether you agree with the economics that get them to that position is irrelevant. What it shows is the potential for a nation like Scotland to be more successful out of the straitjacket of the Union. And I think as time goes on, people will begin to see the Union as the unstable radical choice and independence as being normality and the stable option.
Maggie?
I come from a place, I suppose, where I embrace Scotland's diversity, and for me this screams in the face of everything that we teach our children, and we're trying to bring young people up to be part of an inclusive and diverse society. I do not see the Orange Order as contributing to that at all. I was born and brought up in Glasgow, and I am still aware that I am nervous about that kind of context. And so for me, for this to come back and be utilised, and can I use the current word, which is weaponised, I suppose, because I feel it is. So who's being played here is the next question. And I think Richard has a point, saying this is the 10 MPs from another part of the United Kingdom are being used in our country, and I think, I'm really sorry, that's one step too far for me, because I think what it promotes is something that I find absolutely antithetical to my vision and my belief about what Scotland stands for.
You talked about the idea there that the Orange Order goes against your view, that against the idea of diversity. Do you want to expand on that a little bit more about why that's the case? What is it about the Orange Order that goes against such a value? I
think that there is a prescriptive sense about who is valued and who is not, in its absolute core. And I appreciate they've just had a documentary done where people have been saying that, but actually I think their membership would probably not subscribe to diversity in all its forms, and that to me is an organisation that is not flowing with what I believe the majority in this country really want us to be like. That we're living as for the country we want to be. I don't think that's part of it.
Calum?
I heard the story and I thought it was fake news at first. I thought, surely that can't be true. I mean, are they so out of touch that they think that's a good idea? Because it's a bit, I mean, what it says is, number one, they don't understand Scotland at all. It displays a level of arrogance, I think, that, well, do you know what, we're propping up the UK government, we're getting our way, we've got £1 billion, what is it next? No, you're not touching our laws. If we want to discriminate and force women in Northern Ireland to go overseas or now south of the border to get an abortion, that's our right to do so. Guess what? It's like, well, I'm the King of Scotland, I'm Queen of Scotland, I'm going to go across, I'm going to front up a march. Imagine Nicola Sturgeon went to Northern Ireland and fronted up a march in terms of republicanism or anything, right? Anything. I mean, imagine she went about in the front of a march about the NHS, anything. People would go loopy. The papers would have a field day, and yet here we have Arlene Foster, who's supposed to be a party leader, right, of a certain stature, coming across and fronting up a march for an organisation that I personally share the sentiments that have been made, but wouldn't want to give them publicity, in all honesty. I think their intolerance is best left behind, but what this does is it certainly pushes them to the fore, And actually, maybe this helps us. Maybe this reinforces and reminds people what we're up against. We get worried. I get worried because I don't like people at our marches chanting about the Tories, because it should be about, it doesn't matter who you vote for, it's where do you want your decision made. I get worried about that. But crikey, look at what the other side have got, right? And you don't need to look much forward than this march, so bring it on, bring your pals if that's really what you want to do.
So are you saying there's maybe a double standard with the media then, but the idea that they're kind of...
forbid, a media double standard. I mean, double standard doesn't even do it justice, does it? I mean, we all know, everybody knows. The other side know too, it's just they enjoy it because it serves their purpose. There is a massive double standard, but you know, I go back to the point that who thinks this is a good idea, other than they are inflated with their own importance because they're propping up the government, as was said, and so they're going to make the most of it. And I think it is fundamentally naive, and ultimately, although it annoys me and I think it's wrong, maybe it doesn't do us any harm. I don't know.
Amanda, how do you feel about the Orange Order coming to Fife? And also, do the Orange Order have much of a presence around Dumfries?
Okay, so I'm not really going to talk too much about the Orange Order because obviously I'm here on behalf of Scottish Rural Action. What I would say though is that we have to be careful, talking of double standards, that it's not possible for us to be saying, isn't this great, 10,000 people marching in Dumfries, but then say, oh, but we don't like these other marches going on. And everybody should have the right to go and march and demonstrate for the things that they want. Whether or not it's advisable for a party leader from another part of the country to be coming to Scotland, I think that's possibly a little inflammatory. But that is their decision, and I do believe that people have the right to protest, march, demonstrate, whatever their views are, providing that they're not inciting hate or any other kind of abuse, in which case I believe that we've got laws that can take care of that.
Okay, great. We're going to move on to the next topic of discussion, which is the Growth Commission. I don't think I need to introduce you to this because it's been the debate for pretty much over a week now, actually. There is a criticism with the Growth Commission, mainly from the left of the Yes movement / the SNP / indie group, you name it, that argue that having sterlingisation for around 10 years post-independence is the wrong approach because it gives up monetary sovereignty. Do you agree with such a view, or do you argue that actually sterlingisation is a good transitional period?
Well, I've got sympathy with the idea. I think I would much prefer to have a fully functional Scottish currency. I think we have the balance of payments surplus to support that, and I think we've got a sophisticated enough economy to have a very successful own currency. However, we're building a nation here, and there are certain instruments within this nation that we don't have at the moment. We don't have a central bank. We don't have the functions around a currency that would be required from day one to support that currency. So whilst it's perhaps my ideological preference, I think it's inevitable that we'll have a sensible transition period to make sure that when we do start with our own currency, which I think would be everybody's choice, that we do it at the time where we can make it work the best. And inevitably, there may be some transition of sterling. But however, it's very important to mention there is an enormous difference from a currency union, which was proposed the last time, to having sterlingisation. You can use and trade in any single currency in the world. They're all freely tradable instruments. There's no bar to any country using any currency if they want to do it. And I think the important thing about the currency this time is that we make that distinction between the ill-fated currency union. It was a political disaster, let's not make two bones about it. It was wrapped in a veto, and it was wrapped in the sense of dependence, which was two things that we really were trying to get away from. So politically that didn't work the last time, although economically it may have been the sensible short-term option. But I think as a movement, what we need to do this time, in the face of the chaos surrounding Brexit Britain, is have more confidence when we articulate that position. there's four options. There always has been four options. Let's explain them with confidence. Let's explain them with intellect in a way that we can persuade people. Scotland has got a sophisticated economy with a balance of payments surplus. We can support a currency. We can support any one of those four options. And it's about letting the people of Scotland understand that they should have the confidence in our economy to take that path.
I was speaking to Roger Mullen last week, and he was actually on the Growth Commission himself, and he worked a lot on the idea of visas and, you know, the Welcome to Scotland package. He made his argument that he himself does support the idea of sterlingisation, but he actually reckons that, you know, it wouldn't be 7 or 10 years, it actually would be much more sooner. So would you actually argue that maybe it would be a currency maybe earlier on in the future rather than suggested?
I think there would be huge political demand to do it sooner. Economics is one thing, politics is another. Now, you could easily say that it would be sensible to have a 5 to 10 year transition period, but would the politics of a new nation support that? And I don't think they would. But we are in a better position than any other country in the world who's become independent who wants to support its own currency. We've a balance of payments surplus and the UK's got a deficit, and that's the economic statistic that underpins the strength of your currency. We can do any of the four options, but what we need to do is explain that with confidence, so that confidence rubs off on other people so they don't think it is the huge issue, which it never has been, which the other side made it into in 2014.
Maggie, I'm studying at university just now, and as Richard pointed out, economics is one thing, politics is one thing, and that's something I'm hammered home all the time when I'm doing any studying. So where do you stand on it then, on the politics and economics of it, or are you maybe in the middle somewhere?
I think it's quite interesting because I probably know more about cows than
cows and currency.
Sorry,
I feel a t-shirt coming on.
Galloway's piece. But actually, my naivety, if you like, I'm going to say that there are a couple of things. One, I think the tragedy that we can't get lost in is we can listen to experts. We have to listen, whether it's to the likes of Richard Murphy, Common Wheel, Craig DL, lots of these. We have an opportunity to start unpicking and having a subtle and all-inclusive conversation that feeds into the politics. So I suppose what I'd like is you have a confidence. I am less confident, but that's not because of my will. It's because I know more about cows than you. So I am therefore at a different end of the scale from the likes of yourself. Therefore, I am at the interface of politics and economics, and I want to hear. It's very easy to say what we don't want. It is much more challenging to say how we want to get where we do want. And in terms of aspiration and inspiration, we've actually got 325, 35, 45 pages that we can say, I need to know more about this. And then we can start having absolutely robust and informed and inclusive conversations that will lead us forward. So I'm with the economists on this one, but I want to hear, because I value, that's the nub of it. Let's then include and bring in the politics from the people's point of view.
Calum, as pointed out before, we know that Commonweal came out with a response paper, very quickly I should add, that they go against the idea of sterlingisation. They support it for maybe 3 years of negotiations, but on day one of independence they want a brand new currency. But then of course you also had, like, again as mentioned, Roger Mullen. He said that actually sterlingisation is good maybe for a shorter term. So where do you stand on it then?
One of the great things about not being an MP anymore is that you don't have to worry about going and reading a 300-page document. So I hold my hands up and say, I haven't read it yet, but I will, because my approach to these things is to, I'm sorry, but print them out, make notes, highlight things, think about it.
It's a waste of paper, 350 pages.
Yeah, well, I know. I will put many pages on one page. Okay, right? I'll be as environmentally friendly because this is about putting forward some different ideas. Right? It's not a white paper Mark II. It is different ideas, and it's to stimulate debate. Now, I personally welcome the fact that we are doing some of the stuff Richard's talking about, which is looking at other countries. being creative and considering a better, wider economic proposition. I think last time, as I speak to friends and members of the public even, well, that makes me sound like an MP again, then people say I wasn't convinced. I don't think there was enough substance there. Right? Now, the currency is a big part of it, but it's one part of it. There is so much more to it. And I'm afraid that we've been too simplistic today. Right? I think that the left-wing voice, and I'm not linking this to currency, by the way, but broadly, the left-wing voice has been really strong. And I consider myself centre-left. I want a fairer, more equal society. But there was a reason that in the first independence debate, of the three pillars, fairness and prosperity were two of them, and they're linked. The two of them are linked. If we want a fairer country, we need a more prosperous country. And I think what this Growth Commission report does is it puts some different ideas forward. We're going to have a debate going forward over time. Isn't it great that we're able to? I mean, I'm the same as you, by the way. I can't go to the same level of the economics of it, but I bring other things to hopefully to the debate. But we are engaged, and it's part of what 2014 did for us. It made us take responsibility. It made us learn. It made us start to talk about things, to think differently. So I welcome, and actually I'm probably far more excited about the Growth Commission, even though I haven't bothered to read it yet, because of the approach it takes, and because I know how important that broader economic proposition is. One quick example, and I know I'm probably talking too much here. My cousin works in the computer games industry. He's just moved to Canada. Right? Finley's moved to Canada with his girlfriend Kate because the Canadian games industry is streets ahead of ours in scale and in what these people can earn. There's an example of an industry that we like to big up and think we're doing quite well. But if we were independent, we would have done so much more because we can pick and choose our industries and do things differently. That's the kind of reference point we don't have enough of. Because people would say in 2014, well, what do you mean? Well, we can be more prosperous. And all we would do is fall back on the GERS figures, which are now in a different place, and we look at them differently in terms of the reality or otherwise that they offer. We need more to our economic case so that people from all walks of life have things that they can go, I like that, I agree with that. What about that? So I think inevitably we are navel-gazing a little bit on some of the detail, and we should discuss some of the detail, and the currency is a hot one, and a lot of my friends in the Yes movement disagree, but bring it on. Let's talk about it. Let's figure a way forward, because that's what the UK didn't do on Brexit, and it's part of the reason it's in a mess.
Amanda, when we look at media commentators, or even commentators from both sides of the argument, a lot of them agree that despite maybe disagreements, it's a very mature paper which is worth serious discussion on. What's your take on it?
I think it's really, really interesting, but I think we have to remember that it's a report. It's not a manifesto. So I've actually found it really interesting reading it, but I've also recently read Commonwealth's How to Start a Small Country papers, and it's when you start to compare the two and to have those discussions with other people that it becomes really interesting, because what we're looking at is that the Commission report itself is not a blueprint for our future. It's some ideas to start the discussions rolling, and there are other parts of rural Scotland who have different views, and we need to get their ideas in the pot as well. And I hope that whatever people's politics, they will be prepared to engage in this debate, because it is so important for us. And so that's what I'm looking forward to, is us being able to take bits from all of these documents that are coming forward and have a national conversation that will help us picture the best Scotland that we can for the future.
Absolutely.
We're going to touch on one more area within the Growth Commission before we move on. Now, there was a good detailed area which talked about the Welcome to Scotland package, which was to give tax incentives to a lot of migrants that came here. I was talking about how they could raise billions in revenue if we attract more people to tackle an ageing population. So in contrast to UK government, this is quite something, because the Growth Commission straight was asking, hey, we welcome more migrants. So one, how do we all feel about this approach in terms of the Scottish Government are taking in contrast to the UK Government? And two, How would you respond to critics when they argue, hold on a second, independence maybe is somewhat radical, but actually another radical option is Jeremy Corbyn? We'll start with you, Richard.
Well, yeah, look, it's important to remember, as has been said, that these are ideas, and they're not necessarily the ideas that the Scottish people would elect into a government in an independent Scotland. That remains to be seen. But I think what the Growth Commission's trying to do in more general terms is that in 2014, Calum's right, the economic debate was as much about the past as it was the future. Are we too weak? Are we too poor? How do those figures support us? Have we got enough money? Throughout history, have we earned enough to support an independent state? And the UK government and the press kind of threw a veil over the future and tried to convince us of our own dependency, referring to the past. What the Growth Commission paper does, it opens up the future. And you can see what the possibilities are if you took that line. Now, I don't think the debate today is important to go through every single policy suggestion that's in the Growth Commission. I think it's a discussion of what's possible. And it may well be that the first elective government in an independent Scotland might not take the ideas of the Growth Commission, they might take them from the Common Real, they might take them from somewhere else. But what we're talking about now is the future and what independence can deliver. And we've got so many different ideas across the spectrum in the Yes movement as to what independence could mean. And we want to get people thinking about the future, the possibilities, the ambitions of Scotland, as opposed to thinking about whether the past means we're dependent or secure or confident enough to move forward with confidence. And I welcome that, because now we're talking about the future, now we're talking about what the powers of independence can do. And it's transformational, whichever policy direction you take.
Maggie, do you think that Jeremy Corbyn could be an alternative to independence to win over other voters?
I think he could possibly provide a seductive alternative, but I'm not convinced.
Why is the case?
Pardon?
Why is that the case? You're not convinced?
Because I think Richard touched on it. We have to make our own future, and I don't see that as coming from a policy driven by someone who has reflected the views from the south up here. And if I can just kind of broaden that out a bit, at a cross-party group on rural affairs, COSLA presented a report on migration and out-migration from across rural Scotland. And there was a little box that was divided into four, and the lady who presented it said, can you give me some positive from Brexit, because the tourism folks said, it could be good, and agriculture, it could be good. And I said, you're the one person sitting there at this cross-party group who has said nothing positive. And she said, there is nothing positive in terms of migration and out-migration, in-migration and out-migration, that I can say. And I said, well, I live in this box here. And she said, that's the box you don't want to live in. And there were 4 areas in Scotland, and our out-migration is so enormous into it that other nations disappearing to Canada, going abroad, and actually we have huge issues in Scotland. We have a society that we can aspire to be different, but ultimately we are going to dwindle, and this is one of the 4 regions that's happening, and that's not sustainable. We have to offer a future. This comes back to the person that you were talking about. If Jeremy Corbyn said, I'm coming up to Dumfries and Galloway, what's he going to offer? And I remain unconvinced.
Calum, what is Jeremy Corbyn going to offer?
Well, I think he has things he would like to offer, and then he has to hold the Parliamentary Labour Party together, and then we have the last election where he made a number of promises. And let's be honest, a big chunk of that new vote was young people. And look at what he's now doing on Brexit. There's an incoherence there, right? I actually think, great, maybe we can have a Labour Party that's meaningful again. Because Richard and I, when we were down there, before Jeremy, the dividing line between the two sides was minimal. After Jeremy, then suddenly you just had this disjointed party that wouldn't even work with us when it agreed with us. So quite what Corbyn can deliver, and the fact that he isn't ahead in the polls with what's universally accepted as the worst government in modern times with a, strong and stable? I don't think so. Weak and wobbly Prime Minister that, is only there because nobody else really wants the job, and how on earth do you hold them together? So if Corbyn can't be ahead in that environment, it can't ever. Right? So I personally, I don't think that Corbyn comes into it. I get the line that people say, but I don't think he comes into it. Especially because so much what Corbyn actually talks about, when you look at the policies, we're already doing up here, right? So I don't think he comes into it. Other than Labour voters today, where do they see things going in the future? And how does the Scottish Labour Party deal with that? I think that in itself is a challenge. But if I can go back to your other point that you were making, which was around migration, I'm sure actually Amanda would talk about that. It is a fundamental issue in rural areas. We lose our young people. One of the reasons why the south of Scotland and rural areas, are less in favour of independence is demographics. Young people leave our areas. We have a real challenge with it. You go to businesses, like some of the seafood businesses in the borders, a lot of the workers are EU workers because the young people have actually gone. So there are huge challenges around young people and access to labour and driving rural economies. I think the Growth Commission offers some real interesting and specific detail on how we could change it. That's bold. And by the way, it won't be universally welcomed by people because it's so contrary to the kind of negative nonsense that Farage and others pushed out through Brexit. But that's the thing we should argue for. All the parties argue for a different approach, for more immigration. But let's start put some detail on it. Let's talk about what it actually means. And then Amanda and our rural action groups in Parliament can go, right, well, what can we do? We've got the natural assets. We've got fantastic opportunities. How do we get the people there? Well, here's an opportunity to get the people here.
Amanda, do you, in your opinion, or maybe in your group's opinion, argue that there maybe should be more migration coming to rural economies to help with business? And in general, do you see the Growth Commission as, looking to the future? Do you think it's a good tone to have in terms of discussion?
I wouldn't like to speak about the Growth Commission on behalf of our rural members, but on behalf of our members, I think I can say that there is an acceptance that migration is absolutely vital to have sustainable rural communities. So whether it's about how many children are going to our local rural primary schools and how we keep those schools open because communities are built around local schools, and if the schools close, it has a devastating effect on rural communities. So, whether it's about keeping those numbers up or whether it's about entrepreneurism and encouraging young people who've been away to university and now want to return to where they grew up to bring up their own families. There's something that we need to provide an environment for them and the infrastructure for them so that they can come back and they can open their own businesses. And there are actually some really good news stories when we look at some of the island communities and how they've managed to actually increase their populations, not just with returners, but people returning with new spouses and new families and things like that. And that's actually what we need to be looking at for the whole of rural Scotland. And I think that's where our members can be very important in those discussions about what are those things that are needed to attract people to come back. And we can take a lesson from Euston, places like this, where they've actually seen this depopulation reversed. And that's what we need to see for the whole of rural Scotland.
I think, one of the things that I took from the coverage and snippets I've seen of the Growth Commission was how they viewed inequality. We talk about inequality, about wealth inequality. Right, but one of the points that they made, which I think is going to be central to the debate going forward, is they're talking about regional inequality. The fact that London is sucking in so much of the wealth, that it's creating regional inequality, of which Scotland suffers and other parts of the UK suffer. And it's then the same when it comes to urban and rural. So I think we need to remember that when we're talking about inequality, it's not just about straight wealth inequality. And a big part of the argument of the Growth Commission is, look, this inequality is baked into the UK. There's no desire, there's no move to try and address it in a meaningful way. Yes, they talk about, Northern Powerhouse, and they bring out some other catchy slogans, and they'll try and blur the border by making again some more catchy slogans. But the reality is that's window dressing. The UK is going to continue to be unequal regionally, and the only way to break outside of that and do something different is independence, and the Growth Commission offers all these great ideas on how we could do that.
I think there's another point, is that when we measure these things, we're here in Dumfries and Galloway, which has got one of the lowest GVAs of any region in Scotland. But is that what we should be measuring? Because there are other measures, and a lot of rural communities would say, yes, but well-being is very important. And so, of course, there are lots of economic things that we need to look at. We need to look at how do we afford to care for our older people with an increasingly large older population. Lots and lots of things. But we need to start talking about what's really important, about how do we assess our localities, what do you score for? And it shouldn't just be about GDP.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, yes, it's obviously very important in terms of inequality, that we want to get rid of poverty for sure. But we also need to start bigging up some of our rural areas and talking about the well-being matrix and all of the other things that exist in rural, where urban can actually learn a lot from us. And I think that's
absolutely
very important.
I think on the issue of connectivity, which you and I have talked about a lot in the past, I remember being at an event, where I was talking about the importance of getting our rural areas connected, and a chap made a really valid point, which is we tend to look at data, as Richard said, in the past, right? So the fact is, you can only get good connectivity if you live in these areas. We shape where people live. If you have universal connectivity, people will choose, for all the reasons you outlined. I say, I'm going to go and live in Dumfriesshire or in the Borders because my quality of life is going to be that much better, and I'll actually earn a little bit less, but I'll be happier.
And by the time you've added it all in, you'll probably be just as well off.
Yeah.
I've never heard the UK state refer to happiness indexes and these things, and it's like social democracy in action, isn't it? You refer to the two sides of social democracy, and one is the growing economy, which ultimately must feed the fairer society. We never ever seem to talk in any great detail about non-economic indicators.
It's a bit too Harry Enfield, the loads of money character,
Well, I believe that fundamentally most people in Scotland are social democrats. Social democracy is founded on the principle of a fairer society. So hopefully the Growth Commission will not only trigger conversations about how we can improve our economic performance, but crucially how that economic performance can then feed into the fairer society that we all want.
I agree.
We're going to move on to the final discussion point, which is pinnies. Pinnies, am I correct? I am pronouncing that correct. I am pronouncing it correctly. Pinnies in Annan is sadly closing down because it's being moved to Grimsby down south. It's a loss of 450 jobs, and it's quite devastating for the local area. But it's been pointed out the UK government has given Grimsby £1.3 million in funding to support it, but has not given that same sort of funding or support to Pinnies and Annan. So we'll start with yourself, Richard. How do you view this situation? I mean, it's quite, for a local area, not too many big businesses, this is quite a large loss.
It's a travesty for the local area. I've got family in Annan. Most people that live and work in Annan have got some connection, some way to the Pennies factory, whether they worked there currently or whether they worked there before. One of Dumfries' most famous people, Calvin Harris, I see, was trying to help Pennies because he had a couple of spells in the summer working there. So it's ingrained in the local community, and it's one of these rural towns that disproportionately relies on one employer. And there's no underestimating the potential consequences of Pennies shutting. Now, I must confess, like Calum, and perhaps don't read the news with the haste which we had to when we were MPs every day. So I didn't actually know this argument that Grimsby has been awarded, whilst Penny flies to Grimsby, a bumper bonus by the UK government. But call me a cynic, the entire thing stinks to high heaven. I mean, we all know in Scotland that subliminally, behind the scenes, in the corridors of Westminster, that Scotland's economic dependence on the UK is how they shore up support for the Union. And it's no secret, it's been going on for decades and decades and decades. And I think there's something else at play here. I do think, particularly with some of the rebranding of Scottish produce we've seen, which the Keep the Scotland brand campaign is making huge inroads into highlighting that. And there's a subliminal attempt, whether it's by Westminster, the Department of Trade and Industry, or whether it's DEFRA, or whether it's external voices, there is definitely an attempt to undermine Scotland's economic performance in some way, and therefore recreate or re-energise this feeling of dependency that we've always had. Thankfully, I don't think many people at this table feel that quite as acutely as what we used to, but it stinks to high heaven, and it would not surprise me at all is that if there is something specific behind the scenes to pick away and demoralise us and make us feel even more dependent, because people didn't vote in 2014 for a more prosperous life within the Union. They voted no for fear of what they were told might happen if they voted yes. They didn't vote for a positive case. There is no positive case with the Union. This plays into that whole agenda of creating and amplifying that dependency culture, which really is the only argument that they've got left.
Maggie?
I happen to think that what many folk out with Dumfries and Galloway don't realise is exactly how small Annan's population is and how many wage packets come in to support families from one factory. And when you consider that a large employer in Dumfries and Galloway is somebody who employs about 40 people, losing 450 jobs. I've known people who work for Pennies for a long time, from development and everything else, all of that skill base. There really isn't anywhere else for it to go. We do, to be fair, we have a Castle McClellan here, but that's not going to soak up a 450 posts, which supplied value product, quality product, perfectly well. There was no reason for this, and this is where I'm kind of sitting with what you've just said in my ear. Pennies didn't fail. It's just moving. It's like hiring a something great moving van and going somewhere else. And actually, I think that the drain in terms of economic activity is something that this should not be gone. This shouldn't go without a shout. It really there has to be quite a lot of shouting. I'm sorry to say that I don't think very much is going to happen afterwards. But there's no reason behind this. I can't find it. It's just the moving van tipping over into another town that heaven's sake, I understand needs employment. But taking it from one and giving it to another and paying for that moving van doesn't seem good to me.
Well, if that was a carrot that was dangled in front of Pennies, then I think there's some serious questions to be answered.
Calum?
I'm sure our successors will be asking those questions.
Why is to blame the Scottish Government?
Yeah, they're too busy talking about independence and standing on street corners with petitions. But I think that what this highlights to me is how challenging it is in rural areas to create jobs. And we've already touched about that in terms of people, because businesses will go to a location for a number of reasons, but one of them is they have to feel they can get the workers there, right? But the challenge is in rural areas, it is harder. And that's why the Scottish Government's move and everything that's happening around the South of Scotland partnership is so important, because it is harder to create a job in Annan than it is in East Kilbride, right? Maybe East Kilbride would disagree with that, but in terms of infrastructure and access to people and networks of every form, infrastructure that's there, it is more difficult, which is why you need to just accept and recognise that and come up with a body that can do something about it. And certainly in the South of Scotland, we've been talking about the need for a South of Scotland Enterprise Agency with a different frame of reference that can consider more than just the raw economics, but look at those extra factors and look at impact on community, bit like they have had up in the Highlands, but for the South of Scotland. Our proximity to big conurbations relative to the Highland creates a false impression as to what the reality is on the ground in here. So, I think there should be a lot of praise that the Scottish Government is taking this step, that the SNP are taking this step to put in place an agency that has a better chance of tackling those issues. Not as much as independence would, but sometimes you've got to work with what you're dealt with.
Amanda?
I think it's absolutely tragic what's happening in Annan. And, I think it's really important to what Maggie said about, the average size business in Dumfries and Galloway has about 40 employees. Pinnies has 10 times that, which I think that puts it into perspective a little bit. It is now a done thing. The consultation period's finished, so Pinnies is going. But Scottish Government and the South of Scotland Economic Partnership will continue to try and do something. There is a possibility of a sale or something like that. And certainly they'll be looking at what the job prospects are for the people who have been working at Pinnies. And I know that the South of Scotland Economic Partnership will be holding a consultation meeting in Annan on Tuesday, and I'll be going to that. And I think that's a great opportunity for local people in Annan to come and talk about the situation and to just to try and find out what the options might be, and to see whether there is some potential investment there for the people that have been left behind by the move.
First of all, I want to say thank you very much for all four of our guests today. They've been fantastic as usual. So, there you go. If you enjoy what you've seen here today at Broadcasting Scotland and you want to see more, you can go to our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot. There, if you want, you can give a paid subscription, which means that we can expand what we do for more shows, or heck, give your own suggestion and we'll maybe carry it along and see what we can do. But until then, I'll see you next week. This is Calum Archibald, and you've been watching The Full Scottish. Thank you very much.